My husband forced me to attend a corporate gala with him that night, not because he wanted me there, but because he wanted to impress the new owner of his company. Right before we entered the ballroom, he leaned close and whispered through his teeth, "Stay in the back, and please, don't embarrass me with that dress." I nodded, the way I had learned to nod for most of our marriage. The room was full of powerful people, expensive gowns, loud laughter, crystal lights, and me, standing quietly near the bar, trying to take up as little space as possible. Then the billionaire owner finally arrived. My husband rushed forward smiling, his hand stretched out confidently, but the man didn't even look at him. He walked straight past my husband, straight toward me. He took my hands, looked into my eyes with tears forming, and whispered, "I've been looking for you for 30 years. I still love you." My husband's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. If you think that moment was shocking, wait until you hear what my husband confessed later that night. Stay with me until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story travels. All right. That night did not begin at the gala. It began many years earlier, inside my marriage. I had been married to Fletcher for 25 years. From the outside, people thought I was lucky. A nice house, a successful husband, invitations to events most women only saw in magazines. But what they never saw was how small my world had become. Fletcher did not like noise. He did not like opinions. And he certainly did not like me being noticed. Little by little, I learned what was expected of me. Smile, but not too much. Speak, but only when spoken to. Spend only what he approved. And above all, never embarrass him. I stopped working after we married. Fletcher said it wasn't necessary. He said he would take care of everything. At the time, I believed that meant love. Later, I understood it meant control. He gave me a monthly allowance for personal things. Clothes, toiletries, gifts. Everything had to come from that one number he decided. If I spent too much, he noticed. If I asked questions, he sighed. If I pushed back, he reminded me how lucky I was. Over time, I learned silence was safer. So when Fletcher suddenly told me I was coming to the gala, I felt uneasy. In all our years together, he had never wanted me at his business events. I was usually left at home, where I couldn't say the wrong thing or wear the wrong dress. But that morning, he announced it like a command. "The new owner will be there," he said. "This is important. Important to him, not to me." Still, I did what I always did. I tried to be useful. I tried not to ask questions. I tried not to make things harder. When I told him I didn't have anything suitable to wear, he didn't offer help. He didn't offer kindness. He offered a warning. "Just don't embarrass me." Those words stayed with me all week. As I searched through discount stores and second-hand shops, I kept thinking how strange it was that, after 25 years of marriage, I still felt like a problem he had to manage. Not a partner, not a companion, a risk. That night mattered because something in me already knew. I didn't have the words yet, but I felt it. I felt that I was standing on the edge of something fragile, something dangerous. I just didn't know yet that the past I had buried for 30 years was about to walk straight toward me and change everything. The week before the gala felt longer than it should have. Fletcher handed me $200 and placed it on the kitchen counter like it was a favor I should be grateful for. "That should be enough," he said. "You don't need anything fancy. $200 for a gala filled with millionaires." That amount wasn't just for the dress. It was my entire personal budget for the month. Clothes, shampoo, small gifts, everything. Fletcher liked it that way. It made things simple, as he called it. So I did what I had learned to do over the years. I made it work. I visited thrift stores and consignment shops, places where women like me quietly searched for something decent without being seen. I ran my fingers over fabric, checking seams, imagining how it would look under bright lights and judgmental eyes. Most dresses were too flashy or too worn. Some were beautiful, but far beyond what I could afford. I tried not to feel embarrassed when saleswomen looked at me with polite smiles that didn't quite hide their assumptions. After 3 days, I found it. A navy blue dress with long sleeves. Simple, modest, elegant in a quiet way. It cost $45. The woman at the counter told me it had once come from an expensive store. I wanted to believe her. At home, I pressed it carefully and hung it at the back of my closet. I stood there for a long time staring at it, already preparing myself for Fletcher's disappointment. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Fletcher stepped out of the bedroom, wearing a black tuxedo tailored perfectly to his body. His silver hair was slicked back. He wore his father's gold watch, the one he liked people to notice. He looked successful, confident. Then he turned and saw me. His face changed instantly. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked, his tone sharp. I looked down at myself. In the mirror earlier, I had thought I looked nice. Not stunning, but respectable. Now, standing in front of him, the dress suddenly felt small, old, wrong. "It's the best I could find with the money you gave me," I said quietly. He sighed, shaking his head like I had disappointed him yet again. "It'll have to do," he said. "Just stay in the background tonight. Don't draw attention to yourself. And please, don't talk about anything personal." I nodded. I always nodded. The drive to the hotel was silent except for the soft, classical music Fletcher preferred. He checked his phone again and again, responding to emails, scrolling through messages. I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, touching the small silver locket at my neck without realizing it. It was the only piece of jewelry I owned that Fletcher hadn't bought, the only thing that truly belonged to me. When we arrived at the Grand Hyatt downtown, everything sparkled. Valets, glass doors, marble floors, people stepping out of luxury cars as if they belonged there. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers. Women wore gowns that probably cost more than I had spent on clothes in years. Fletcher leaned close to me one last time. "Stay here," he said, pointing to a spot near the bar where tall plants cast shadows. "I need to speak to some people. Don't wander." Then he walked away without looking back, and there I stood, in a $45 dress, in a room full of wealth and power, trying my best to disappear. I stayed exactly where Fletcher left me, near the bar, half hidden by tall decorative plants. Close enough to be seen if needed, but far enough to be ignored. I held a glass of water I didn't want and watched the room like an outsider, looking through glass. Men in expensive suits laughed loudly at jokes that weren't funny. They spoke in confident voices about mergers, investments, and numbers too large for me to imagine. Their words were polished, practiced, meant to impress one another. Their wives stood nearby, smiling easily. They compared jewelry, vacations, and schools their children attended. Everything about them said they belonged there. I did not. Every few minutes I caught sight of Fletcher across the room. He moved from group to group, shaking hands, leaning in too close, smiling a little too hard. His gestures were quick, restless. I recognized that look. It was the look of a man who needed something. I knew his business was struggling. I had heard the late-night phone calls, the hushed conversations about loans and deadlines. I had learned not to ask questions, but that didn't mean I didn't listen. Tonight wasn't about celebration for Fletcher. It was about survival. Time passed slowly. 10 minutes. Then 20. I noticed how people subtly turned their bodies away from Fletcher as he spoke. How nods became shorter. How smiles faded faster than they appeared. Whatever he was offering, they weren't buying. I took a small step deeper into the shadows, wishing I could disappear completely. The room felt too bright, too loud, too aware of everything I was not. Then something changed. It was subtle at first. Conversation softened. Laughter faded. Heads began to turn toward the entrance. The energy in the room shifted, like the air before a storm. I followed everyone's gaze and felt my breath catch. A man had just entered the ballroom. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples. He didn't rush. He didn't search for attention. Attention found him. He moved with a quiet confidence that made the rest of the room feel suddenly uncertain. Someone near me whispered, almost reverently, "That's him. Julian Blackwood, the new CEO." The name hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the bar to steady myself. Julian. For a moment I told myself it was impossible. Names repeat. Faces change. Time moves on. But then he turned slightly, scanning the room with dark, familiar eyes. And I knew. I knew the way you know something deep in your bones before your mind can catch up. That was Julian Blackwood, the man I had loved when I was young, the man I had left behind, the man I had not seen in 30 years. My heart began to pound so loudly, I was sure others could hear it. I pressed myself further into the shadows, hoping, foolishly, that he wouldn't see me. Across the room, Fletcher noticed the commotion. His posture straightened instantly. His eyes lit up with recognition and opportunity. He smoothed his jacket and began pushing through the crowd toward Julian, his confidence returning as if someone had turned a switch. I watched in silence, my husband moving toward the man who still lived quietly in my heart. And I had no idea that within moments, the past I had buried would stand directly in front of me and refuse to stay silent any longer. For a few seconds, Julian Blackwood stood near the entrance, speaking quietly to someone from the hotel staff. He smiled politely, nodded once, and then began to look around the room, not the way people usually do. He wasn't searching for business partners. He wasn't scanning faces to see who mattered. It felt personal. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, as if he were looking for something he wasn't sure he would find. I told myself to look away. I told myself I was imagining things. That time had played tricks on my memory. That the man I loved at 22 couldn't possibly be standing a few yards away from me now. But my heart didn't listen. I felt it react before my mind caught up. When Julian turned slightly, the light from the chandelier caught his face, and everything else faded. The strong jaw, the familiar intensity in his eyes, the way his head tilted just a little when he was thinking. 30 years had passed. Lines had appeared. Life had left its marks. But it was him. There was no doubt. I felt suddenly exposed, standing there in the shadows like a secret that didn't want to be discovered. I shifted my body slightly, hoping the tall plants would hide me better. I didn't want him to see me. Not like this. Not as Fletcher Morrison's wife. Not in a room where I had no voice. Across the ballroom, Fletcher noticed Julian at the same moment the rest of the room did. I saw the change in him immediately. His shoulders straightened. His smile returned. Hope flickered across his face. This was the man he needed. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, Fletcher smoothed his jacket and began weaving his way through the crowd toward Julian. He moved quickly, afraid someone else might reach him first. I watched, my chest tight. My husband was walking toward the man who had once been my entire world. Julian accepted greetings from a few executives along the way, shaking hands politely, exchanging brief words. But his attention kept drifting. Back to the room, back to the faces, back to something unseen. And then, as if pulled by something invisible, his eyes found mine. The moment stretched. The noise of the ballroom disappeared. Julian Blackwood froze. The color drained from his face, and his confident expression cracked. Just for a heartbeat. In that instant, he wasn't a powerful CEO. He was a man staring at a past he never stopped searching for. And I knew before he took a single step toward me that nothing would be the same after this moment. Fletcher reached Julian first. I watched my husband step directly into his path, his smile wide and confident, his hand already extended. "Mr. Blackwood," Fletcher said loudly, his voice polished and eager. "Fletcher Morrison, Morrison Industries. I've been hoping to meet you." Julian looked at him for just a second. Then he looked past him. Julian's hand never lifted. The handshake Fletcher had rehearsed stayed suspended in the air, awkward and unwanted. At first, Fletcher didn't notice. He kept talking, filling the silence with practiced words about partnerships and shared goals. But Julian wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on me. Slowly, deliberately, Julian stepped around my husband as if he were invisible. And then he started walking. Straight toward me. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. People leaned in, sensing something unexpected unfolding in front of them. I felt frozen in place, my feet heavy against the marble floor. Julian stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see his hands trembling slightly. "Marin," he said softly. Hearing my name from his lips after all these years made my chest ache. Before I could speak, he reached out and took both of my hands in his. Gasps rippled through the room. His touch was warm, steady, familiar in a way that made my eyes burn. "I've been looking for you for 30 years, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped." The room was completely silent now. Then he lifted his eyes to mine and said the words that shattered everything. "I still love you." For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then, crash! The sound of glass hitting marble echoed through the ballroom. Fletcher's champagne flute had slipped from his fingers and shattered at his feet. People stared openly now. No one pretended not to see. Fletcher turned slowly, his face pale with shock and humiliation. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice sharp and strained. "Maren?" Julian didn't let go of my hands. "Excuse me," he said calmly without looking at Fletcher. "I need to speak with your wife." "My wife?" Fletcher snapped, stepping forward. "You must be confused. She's nobody. She doesn't matter." Julian finally looked at him then, and the look he gave my husband was cold and dismissive. "She matters," Julian said quietly. "More than you know." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and in that moment, standing in a $45 dress in the middle of a room full of power and wealth, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Seen. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, uncomfortable, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Then Fletcher moved. He stepped between Julian and me, his face red with humiliation and anger. His smile was gone now. What remained was something sharp and ugly. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Maren, what is this nonsense?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How do you explain 30 years of buried truth in front of strangers? How do you explain a love you never truly let go of? Julian's eyes never left my face. "Could we speak privately?" he asked gently. Fletcher laughed, loud and harsh. "Privately? She's my wife. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of me." Julian shook his head once. "I can't." That simple refusal sent a ripple through the room. I felt Fletcher's hand close around my arm, tight enough to make me wince. "We're leaving," he said through clenched teeth. "Now." Julian noticed. His expression darkened as his eyes dropped to Fletcher's grip on me. For a brief moment, I thought he might intervene. Thought he might say something that would make everything explode even further. I shook my head slightly. "Not here. Not like this." Julian understood. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small white business card, embossed in silver. He held it out to me. "Please," he said quietly. "Call me. We need to talk." My fingers trembled as I took the card. When our hands brushed, a jolt of memory ran through me, of a time when touch meant comfort, not control. "I'll be waiting," Julian added softly. Fletcher tightened his grip and pulled me away. He didn't say another word as he dragged me through the ballroom, past staring faces and whispered speculation. I could feel the weight of their eyes on my back, but I kept my gaze forward. The ride home was silent at first. Then Fletcher exploded. "What were you thinking?" he shouted, gripping the steering wheel. "Do you have any idea what you did tonight?" "You humiliated me." I stared out the window. Julian's card pressed tightly in my palm. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." Fletcher continued. "You made me look like a fool." I said nothing. There was no point. There never had been. By the time we reached the house, my arm throbbed where his fingers had dug into my skin. Fletcher stormed inside and disappeared into his study. Slamming the door behind him, I went to the bedroom alone. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally looked at the card. Julian Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer. A phone number, an email. 30 years of silence reduced to a few printed lines. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt something else. Hope. That night, as Fletcher ranted on the phone behind closed doors, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting backward, back to a different life. A different version of myself. To a time when love felt simple. To a time before fear made my choices for me. And without realizing it, I began to remember how it all started. Julian and I met when I was 22 years old. I was a literature student at Colorado State, there on a partial scholarship and a lot of determination. I worked 3 jobs just to keep myself afloat. Early mornings at a cafe, afternoons in the library. Weekends tutoring freshmen who were just as overwhelmed as I was. I was always tired, always counting dollars, always afraid. One mistake could cost me everything. Julian noticed me anyway. Our first real conversation happened in the library during finals week. I had spread my books across 3 chairs, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scribbled notes. I must have looked half awake, half lost. He stopped in front of my table and tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You look like you could use real food," he said, smiling. "I barely looked up, I'm fine," I replied automatically. He didn't move. "The cafeteria closes in 20 minutes, he said. "But there's a diner down the street that stays open all night. Best pie in town." I finally met his eyes then, ready to politely decline I didn't have money for late-night meals. And I definitely didn't have time for distractions. "I can't afford diners," I said honestly. Julian smiled again, softer this time. "I didn't ask if you could afford it," he said. "I asked if you were hungry." That was Julian. Direct, kind, unpretentious. We went to that diner. He bought me apple pie and listened while I talked about books, about wanting to teach someday, about how afraid I was of losing my scholarship. He didn't interrupt. He didn't brag. He didn't try to impress me. He just listened. From that night on, we were rarely apart. He showed me his world. Business classes, networking events, people who talked about money like it was air. But he never tried to change me to fit into it. And I showed him mine. Late-night study sessions, shared pizza in cramped dorm rooms, long conversations about dreams that felt too big for the lives we were living. We talked about everything. Family fear, the future. With Julian, I felt seen in a way I never had before. The night he proposed was simple and perfect. We were sitting by the campus lake, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The water reflected gold and orange, and the air smelled like summer grass. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. His hands were shaking when he opened it. Inside was an emerald ring. Antique. Beautiful. My grandmother's, he said quietly. "It's been passed down for generations." Then he looked at me with those dark, serious eyes. "Maren," he said, "marry me. I want to spend my life choosing you." I didn't hesitate. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. We were young. We were in love. And we believed, truly believed, that love was enough. We made plans the way young people do. A small wedding after graduation. A tiny apartment while Julian finished his MBA. Life built together slowly and honestly. I had never been happier. I had no idea how quickly everything could be taken away. Julian's parents did not share our happiness. I learned that the hard way. A week after our engagement, Julian told me his father wanted to meet. He said it casually, like it was nothing to worry about. He believed people could be reasoned with. That love, when explained clearly enough, would be understood. I didn't share his confidence. Charles Blackwood was old money, the kind of man whose family name opened doors without knocking. He asked me to meet him at his office downtown, high above the city in a building that made me feel small the moment I stepped inside. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask about my studies. He looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't belong. "So," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you're the girl my son plans to marry." I lifted my chin and tried to be brave. "Julian and I are engaged." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Are you?" he said. "How interesting." He asked me about my parents, their jobs, where I grew up, how I paid for school. Each question was polite on the surface, sharp underneath. When he was finished, he folded his hands and spoke calmly. "You don't fit into our world, Miss Campbell." I told him that love mattered more than social circles, that Julian and I were happy, that we would build our own life. He laughed softly. "Love is a luxury," he said. "And luxuries are things my family cannot afford mistakes with." Then his tone changed. He told me he had connections at the university, that my scholarship could disappear with a single phone call, that without it, I would be forced to leave school. And if that wasn't enough, he told me he could make sure Julian failed too. "No company will hire him," Charles said. "No bank will lend to him. Every door he tries to open, I will close." I felt my throat tighten. Then he leaned forward and delivered his final demand. "You will break up with my son. You will tell him you realized you are not right for each other. You will return the ring. And in exchange, I will let you finish your education." I asked what would happen if I refused. He didn't hesitate. "Then I will destroy you both." I left his office shaking, and 3 days later, sitting alone in my dorm bathroom, I found out I was pregnant. I was 22 years old, staring at a plastic test strip, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I wanted to tell Julian immediately. I imagined his face lighting up, his voice filled with wonder. We had talked about children, about someday, but someday had arrived too soon. And now, Charles Blackwood's threats weren't just about Julian and me. They were about the life growing inside me. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I broke up with Julian. I met him at our favorite coffee shop near campus. He smiled when he saw me, kissed my forehead, asked how the meeting with his father had gone. I couldn't look at him. I told him we wanted different things, that I wasn't ready for his world, that I didn't love him the way I thought I did. Every word felt like poison. He argued, he pleaded. He told me we could live simply, that he would give up everything for me. I couldn't let him. I placed the emerald ring on the table between us and stood up before my courage. Failed completely. "Goodbye, Julian," I whispered. I walked out while he sat there in shock. 3 weeks later, I miscarried. I lost the baby alone, in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and silence. I cried for the child I never held, and for the future that died with it. Julian tried to reach me during those weeks. Messages, calls, even showing up places he thought I might be. I couldn't face him. Eventually, he stopped trying. 6 months later, Fletcher Morrison asked me to marry him. He was safe, predictable, and I was broken. So I said yes. I spent 3 nights staring at Julian's business card before I found the courage to touch the phone. Each time I reached for it, Fletcher's voice echoed in my head, reminding me of all the reasons I shouldn't, all the ways this could explode, all the things I could lose. But lying awake at 3 in the morning, I finally understood something I had avoided for years. There was nothing left to lose. What I had with Fletcher wasn't a life. It was a routine built on fear and silence. On the 4th morning, Fletcher left early for a golf meeting with investors. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before I went into the kitchen and picked up the phone. My hands shook as I dialed. "Blackwood Industries," a woman answered professionally. I hesitated, suddenly unsure who I was supposed to be. I wasn't Julian's fiancée anymore. I wasn't his lost love. I was Fletcher Morrison's wife, calling a man who had declared his love for me in front of a ballroom full of powerful people. "This is Marin Morrison," I said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to call." There was a brief pause, then her voice softened. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Blackwood has been expecting your call." When Julian came on the line, his voice sounded the same. Steady, warm, familiar. "Marin," he said. "Thank you for calling." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I don't know if this is wise. Some things aren't about being wise," he replied gently. "They're about being honest." He asked if we could meet, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. We chose a small cafe downtown, a place tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, somewhere people came to think, not to be seen. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner. My heart pounded as I watched the door. Julian walked in exactly on time. He looked different in the daylight. Older, more grounded, but when he smiled at me, I saw the man I had loved at 22. "You look beautiful," he said softly. No one had called me beautiful in years. We ordered coffee. Then we sat in silence. 30 years pressing down between us. Finally, Julian spoke. "Why did you leave?" he asked. "The real reason." So I told him everything. About his father's threats. About my scholarship. About the pregnancy I never shared. About the miscarriage that followed. Julian went very still. "My father did this to you," he said quietly. "And you carried my child." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was terrified," I said. "And because I thought I was protecting you." He didn't argue. He just reached across the table and held my hand. "My father died 5 years ago," he said. "I never knew what he did. I spent years thinking you simply stopped loving me." "I never did," I whispered. "Not for one day." Julian took a breath, then said something that changed everything. "I'm divorced," he said. "No children, no real love. And I've been searching for you for 30 years. The weight of that settled between us. I know you're married," he continued. "And I won't pressure you. But Maren, you deserve more than the life you're living. He paused. If you want out, he said, I can help. I can offer you a job. Financial independence. Protection. A job. A way to stand on my own feet. I stared at my coffee, my mind racing. I need time, I said. Julian nodded. Take it, he said. Just don't disappear again. When we stood to leave, he kissed my cheek gently. No rush. No demand. I'll be here, he said. Whenever you're ready. I walked out of that cafe knowing one thing, with absolute certainty. The life I was living could not continue. And when I pulled into my driveway later that afternoon, I saw Fletcher waiting inside the house. From the look on his face, I knew the choice I thought I still had was about to be challenged. Fletcher was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came home. He stood near the counter, jacket still on, his phone in his hand. The calm on his face felt unnatural, like the quiet before something breaks. Where have you been? He asked. Out. I replied carefully, hanging my purse by the door. I needed some air. Out, he repeated. For 3 hours. I said nothing. He took a step closer. You went to see him. It wasn't a question. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice steady. I met Julian for coffee. Fletcher smiled, not warmly, not kindly. He smiled the way a man smiles when he realizes he's losing control. So, he said softly, it finally happened. He moved closer again, too close. You embarrassed me at that gala, he continued. And now you think you can sneak around behind my back? I wasn't sneaking, I said. I was talking. Talking, he repeated, mocking. After 30 years, he shows up and suddenly you're talking. I turned to face him fully. You don't get to decide who I talk to. That was when something in him shifted. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm, hard. You don't get to decide anything, he said quietly. Not while you're my wife. Pain shot through my arm, but I didn't cry out. I had learned long ago that pain pleased him. Let go of me, I said. Or what? He sneered. You'll call your billionaire savior? Then he laughed, and that laugh still chills me when I think about it. You want to know something, Maren? He said. Something you should have figured out years ago? I said nothing. I knew about Julian. My breath caught. I knew he was looking for you. Fletcher continued calmly. Private investigators, phone calls, inquiries. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. I stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying, he replied, that every time he got close, I made sure he didn't. The room felt like it was tilting. You stopped him? Fletcher shrugged. Money talks. A few favors here, some false leads there. I made sure every trail went cold. My legs felt weak. You lied to him, I whispered. I protected my marriage, Fletcher snapped. I protected you. You trapped me, I said. For the first time, Fletcher looked irritated, instead of amused. You would have left, he said flatly. The moment he showed up, you would have walked out that door and never looked back. I couldn't allow that. 30 years. 30 years of silence, of unanswered questions, of a man believing I had simply stopped loving him, and my husband had orchestrated it all. You destroyed his life, I said. Fletcher scoffed. I saved him. He was obsessed with you. He would have wasted his life chasing a fantasy. I was never a fantasy, I said. I was real. You were mine, Fletcher replied coldly. Something broke inside me then, not loudly, not all at once, quietly, cleanly. I never chose you, I said. The words landed harder than I expected. Fletcher froze. I settled for you, I continued, because I was grieving, because I was scared. But I never chose you. For the first time in 25 years, I saw real hurt flash across his face. Then it vanished. You think Julian loves you? He said cruelly. He loves the memory of a 22-year-old girl, not a woman who's been invisible for decades. I looked at him steadily. Even if he doesn't, I said. He gave me something you never did. What's that? Fletcher asked sharply. A choice. I pulled Julian's business card from my purse and placed it on the counter between us. He offered me a job, I said. Independence. Fletcher's face hardened. You're not taking it." "Yes, I am." "No," he said quietly. "You're not. Because if you try to leave me, I will destroy you financially. I'll drag this out in court until you're broke and exhausted. You'll come crawling back." There it was. Not love. Not partnership. Ownership. I met his eyes and spoke calmly. "I'd rather lose everything than spend one more day being owned by you." Silence filled the kitchen. Then Fletcher stepped back. "Get out," he said. "Get out of my house." I nodded. "Gladly." As I turned toward the stairs, he called after me. "You'll regret this. When Julian gets tired of you, you'll come back. And maybe, if I'm feeling generous, I'll take you." I didn't turn around, because for the first time in my life I knew, with certainty, going back was no longer an option. I went upstairs slowly, my legs unsteady but my mind clear. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't packing out of fear. I wasn't trying to calm Fletcher down. I wasn't hoping he would forgive me. I was leaving because I chose to. I opened my closet and looked at the clothes hanging there. Most of them were things Fletcher had approved of. Neutral colors, modest cuts, safe choices. I packed only what was mine. A small suitcase, comfortable shoes, a few books I loved, the silver locket I always wore. From the back of a drawer, I pulled out the emerald ring I had kept hidden for decades. Julian's grandmother's ring, the one I had never been able to give away, even when I told myself I should. I held it for a long moment. Then I placed it carefully in my purse. Downstairs I could hear Fletcher on the phone. His voice rose and fell, sharp with anger, already explaining his version of events to someone else. A lawyer, perhaps, or a business associate who owed him a favor. I realized something then. Even now, even as I walked away, he was trying to control the story. I closed the suitcase and walked back down the stairs. Fletcher didn't look at me when I passed through the kitchen. He was too busy talking, too busy plotting, too busy convincing himself he was still in charge. I stopped at the front door. For a moment, I waited for fear to catch up with me. It didn't. Instead, I felt something lighter. Like a breath I had been holding for years had finally been released. "I won't be back," I said quietly. Fletcher waved a dismissive hand, still on the phone. I opened the door and stepped outside. The evening air was cool against my skin. The sky was just beginning to darken. The neighborhood quiet and unaware that a life had ended inside that house. I stood on the driveway with my suitcase beside me, unsure where I would go next. And then I did something that would have terrified me. A week earlier, I pulled out my phone and called Julian. He answered immediately. "Marin," he said. "Are you okay?" "I left," I said. "I'm standing outside the house right now." There was no hesitation in his voice. "Where are you?" he asked. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." I didn't argue. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I simply waited. As I stood there under the darkening sky, I realized something important. Choosing myself didn't feel dramatic. It felt calm. It felt like survival. And whatever happened next, whatever consequences came, whatever battles waited ahead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never go back to the woman I had been before. Julian arrived less than 20 minutes later. I watched his car pull into the driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a promise. He stepped out quickly, his face tight with concern, and the moment he saw me standing there with my suitcase, something in his expression softened. "You're safe now," he said quietly. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead I felt steady, almost strangely calm. Julian took my suitcase and didn't ask questions until we were driving away. Only when the house disappeared in the rearview mirror did he speak again. "Did he hurt you?" I looked down at the bruises already forming on my arm. Purple fingerprints that told a story I had tried to deny for too long. "Yes," I said. "But it didn't start tonight." Julian nodded, his jaw tightening. "It ends now." He took me to a hotel downtown that night. Nothing extravagant, just quiet, safe. A place where no one could knock on the door and demand explanations. The next morning, Julian introduced me to a lawyer. Not one of Fletcher's polished friends. Not someone who spoke in half-truths and threats. A woman, sharp, calm, unimpressed by intimidation. She listened as I told my story. The control, the financial restrictions, the isolation. the bruises, the manipulation that had kept me trapped for decades. When I finished, she closed her notebook. "Your husband has made mistakes," she said. "Very serious ones." Within days, Fletcher tried to fight back. He froze joint accounts. He sent threatening messages through his attorney. He claimed I was unstable, ungrateful. But something was different now. I wasn't alone. Julian's legal team responded calmly, precisely. Every threat Fletcher made was met with documentation. Every accusation was met with evidence. Then something unexpected happened. Julian's lawyers, while reviewing Fletcher's business records for the divorce, noticed inconsistencies, missing money, strange transfers, companies that existed only on paper. They dug deeper, and what they found changed everything. Fletcher's business wasn't just failing. It was dirty. Money laundering, fraud, tax evasion hidden behind real estate deals and shell companies. Julian didn't rush to use it against him. He didn't need to. Federal investigators were already watching Fletcher. The evidence simply gave them what they needed to move. 2 weeks later, Fletcher Morrison was arrested at his office. I watched the news footage from the hotel room. Fletcher in handcuffs. Cameras flashing. His confident mask finally gone. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge. I felt relief. The man who had controlled my life for 25 years no longer had the power to hurt me. The divorce moved quickly after that. Fletcher's assets were frozen. His lawsuits disappeared. His lawyers had bigger problems to deal with than harassing me. For the first time since I could remember, no one was threatening me. No one was monitoring my spending. No one was deciding where I could go or who I could speak to. I slept through the night, and that, more than anything, told me I had done the right thing. I didn't move in with Julian right away. That was important to me. For so many years, my life had been shaped by other people's decisions. First fear, then obligation, then survival. I needed to know who I was before becoming part of someone else's world again. Julian understood that without argument. He helped me find a small furnished apartment near the river. Nothing extravagant, just light-filled rooms, clean lines, and silence that didn't feel threatening. The first night I slept there, I woke up disoriented, my heart racing, expecting to hear Fletcher's voice calling my name. But there was only quiet, and slowly I began to breathe again. A week later, I started my new job at Blackwood Industries. Julian had created a role for me in community outreach, working with local schools, literacy programs, and libraries. It used my education, my voice, the parts of myself I had buried for decades. On my first day, I wore clothes I chose myself. No approval, no budget lecture, no fear of doing something wrong. People listened when I spoke. They asked my opinion. They thanked me for my ideas. I came home that evening exhausted in the best possible way. For the first time in my adult life, my tiredness came from purpose, not fear. Healing didn't happen all at once. Some days, small things startled me. A raised voice in a meeting, a sharp tone in a phone call. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But Julian never rushed me. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me how I should feel. He simply showed up. Sometimes we had dinner together. Sometimes we just walked along the river in silence. Sometimes we talked for hours about everything we had lost and everything we still had time to build. Slowly, trust returned. Not the blind trust of youth. The careful, earned trust of someone who knows what it costs to lose it. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights come on, Julian looked at me and said, "I don't want to replace anything you lost. I just want to build something new. With you, if you want that too." I realized then that love didn't need to be loud. It could be patient. It could be kind. It could wait. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was curious about it. 8 months later, I stood in front of a mirror adjusting a simple ivory dress. There was no veil, no dramatic train, no audience meant to be impressed. Just me. And the woman staring back at me looked different from the one who had stood beside Fletcher all those years ago. She was older, yes, but she was also stronger, calmer, certain. Julian and I chose a small ceremony at a quiet garden overlooking the mountains. 50 guests, close friends, people who had watched me rebuild myself, piece by piece, and never once questioned my worth. As I walked toward Julian, I saw the same man who had waited for me for 30 years. But this time he wasn't rescuing me. He was choosing me, and I was choosing him. When Julian took my hands, he smiled softly and reached into his pocket. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was the emerald ring. "My grandmother used to say some things don't belong to time," he said quietly. "They just wait." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I felt something settle inside me. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't promise forever the way I had at 22. I promised honesty, choice, and courage. I promised never to disappear from myself again, I said. And never to let fear decide my life. Julian's eyes filled with tears. And when we kissed, it wasn't desperate. It was certain. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Julian and I stood together watching the sky change colors. "Any regrets?" he asked gently. I thought about the years I had lost, the silence, the fear. Then I shook my head. "No," I said, "because if I hadn't lived through all of that, I wouldn't understand how precious this is." Julian squeezed my hand. 58 isn't too late," he said. "It's exactly on time," I replied. And as the night settled around us, I realized something I wish I had known much earlier in life. Love isn't proven by how much you endure. It's proven by how free you feel. The final word to the audience. Listen grandma style. If you're listening to my story and wondering whether it's too late to choose yourself, whether you've waited too long, whether love or freedom or peace has passed you by, let me tell you this. It hasn't. Sometimes life doesn't give us a happy beginning. Sometimes it gives us a second one. Now tell me, what would you have done in my place? And if this story touched you, don't forget to comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has reached.